in a very beautiful passage, Jeremiah describes a future restoration of the temple, the bringing of offerings again, the singing of psalms and praise. And this is in contrast to chapter 25. There in chapter 25, he warned that God will banish the sound of mirth and gladness, the voice of bridegroom and bride, leaving the land a desolate ruin. And now, in his oracle of consolation, Jeremiah says, "And again there shall be heard in this place, in the towns of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem that are desolate, without man, without inhabitants, without beast, the sound of mirth and gladness, the voice of bridegroom and bride, the voice of those who cry, 'Give thanks to the Lord of hosts, for the Lord is good, for his kindness is everlasting,' as they bring thanksgiving offerings to the house of the Lord. For I will restore the fortunes of the land as of old, said the Lord." So just to kind of summarize these prophets leading up to the time of the destruction, because next time we'll be talking about the exile and later the return. But the fall of Jerusalem shattered the national and territorial bases of Israel's culture and religion. The Babylonians had burned the temple to the ground. They carried away most of the people to exile, to live in exile in Babylon, leaving behind mostly members of the lower classes to eke out a living as best they could. And it was the completion of a tragedy that had begun centuries earlier, and it was interpreted as a fulfillment of the covenant curses. It was the end of the Davidic monarchy, although the Deuteronomistic historian does close with this note that the son of Jehoiakim was alive and living in Babylon, kind of holding out hope that the line hadn't actually been killed out, hadn't been completely wiped out. But the institution seemed to have come to an end for now. It was the end of the temple, the end of the priesthood, the end of Israel as a nation, as an autonomous nation. And so the Israelites were confronted with a great test. As I've stressed before, one option would be to see in these events a signal that Yahweh had abandoned them to, or had been defeated by, the God of the Babylonians, and Marduk would replace Yahweh as the Israelites assimilated themselves into their new home. And certainly there were Israelites who went this route, but others who were firmly rooted in exclusive Yahwism did not, and they're the ones who left us their literature. How could this faith survive outside the framework of Israelite national culture, away from the temple and the land, uprooted and scattered? Could Israelite religion survive without these national foundations and institutions and on foreign soil, or would it go the way of other national religions? You hear the pain and the despair that would have been experienced at this time in the words of the psalmist, Psalm 137, which is written at this time. "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept as we thought of Zion. There on the poplars we hung up our lyres, for our captors asked us there for songs, our tormentors for amusement. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing a song of the Lord on alien soil? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither, let my tongue stick to my palate if I cease to think of you, if I do not keep Jerusalem in memory, even at my happiest hour." And it was the message of the prophets that helped some Israelites make sense of their situation in a manner that kept them distinct and invulnerable to assimilation. And this was probably the reason for the preservation of the prophetic writings, even though they had often been despised or unheeded in their own lifetimes. Yahweh hadn't been defeated, they claimed. The nation's calamities were not disproof of his power and covenant. They were proof of it. The prophets had spoken truly when they had said that destruction would follow if the people didn't turn from their moral and religious violations of God's law. So that rather than undermining faith in God, the defeat and the exile, when interpreted in the prophetic manner, had the potential to convince Jews of the need to show absolute and undivided devotion to God and his commandments. So that paradoxically, the moment of greatest national despair could be transformed by the prophets into an occasion for the renewal of religious faith. The great contribution of the prophets was their emphasis on God's desire for morality, as expressed in the ancient covenant. The great contribution of Jeremiah was his insistence on God's everlasting covenant with his people, even outside the land of Israel, and despite the loss of national religious symbols, the temple, the holy city, the Davidic king. And this insistence that the faithful person's relationship with God wasn't broken, even in an idolatrous land, when added to Jeremiah's notion of a new covenant, provided the exiles with the ideas that would transform the nation of Israel into the religion of Judaism.